No toe tags.
Okay. I can say good afternoon. It's after 12. Good afternoon, Governor Baker, Lieutenant Governor Polito, Secretary Theoharides, and guests. Thank you to Linda Anderson and Nick Pelletier of St. Bernard's High School in Fitchburg, the DPW, Fitchburg State University, for assisting and coordinating today's event. Welcome to the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Planning and Action Grants announcement. This program provides funding for cities and towns across the Commonwealth to help plan for climate change impacts and to build more resilient communities. Fitchburg's John Fitch Highway has been a source of challenges for many years. It is fitting that we gather here to accept this MVP grant. This funding will begin to address those issues that impact the overall community. This project will be an innovative example of tying together economic growth, improved mobility, and climate resiliency. A special thank you to the Fitchburg DPW team and Weston and Sampson for writing a successful application. I want to take this opportunity to once again thank the Baker-Polito Administration for their continued support and partnership in making Fitchburg a community that continues to improve the lives of their residents. It is with great pleasure that I introduce and welcome the Governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Charlie Baker. Mr. Governor.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. It's great to be here to celebrate with you and to talk a little bit about Climate Week here in the Commonwealth and about our MVP program. But before we get started on that, I do want to take a minute to say a few words about the passing of Chief Justice Ralph Gantz. Like everybody, I was shocked and deeply saddened to learn about his passing, and he was clearly taken from us far too soon. He spent his entire 40-year legal career dedicated to justice and to the integrity of law. He was an exceptional leader, an incredibly hard worker, and somebody who led the court with honor and distinction. And those who had the privilege of working with him or going in front of him when he was a judge all spoke about his brilliance, but also about his sense of humor, his grace, his kindness, and his thoughtfulness. He was someone who loved his work on the court, but more importantly, somebody who simply loved the role, the point, and the purpose of the judiciary. His colleagues across the board had the utmost respect for him, which he earned day after day after day over the course of that career, and were deeply fond of him, and it's not hard to see why. He was one of those people who every day put the public good first. He leaves behind a legacy as a jurist and as a public servant that is unparalleled, and I know I speak for our administration and especially for the folks on our team who spend significant amount of time dealing with the court, that we will all miss him very, very much. We've also ordered the American flag of the Commonwealth of Mass and the Commonwealth of Mass flag to be lowered to half-staff until further notice to honor his legacy. Our thoughts and prayers, of course, are with his wife, Debbie, his two children, the rest of his families, his colleagues, and his friends. You know, he's 65 years old. Played soccer practically every weekend. And was one of those people who just radiated energy, kinetic energy. I mean, you spend any time at all around him, and the guy was alive. And I mean really alive in every sense of that word. Which is why I think for those of us who've worked with him and know him, this was such a shocking and in some ways overwhelming event. And even after the Lieutenant Governor and I talked about this after it was announced about 10 days ago that he had a heart attack. We both talked about the fact that the only question in our mind was how long it would be before he was back presiding as chief of the SJC again. The whole idea that we could be approaching the last 10 days of his time with us here on Earth was a preposterous notion if you knew him. And I know I speak for so many when I say that that's a really bright light that just went out. And we here in Massachusetts are so much better for his presence and his work, but boy, is he going to be missed. And on a slightly more mundane and traditional topic, I do want to give a quick update on COVID-19 and all that's going on there here in Massachusetts. Yesterday, the Department of Public Health reported over 12,000 individuals been tested by molecular tests, and over the weekend, the Department of Public Health hit a significant milestone, announcing that over 3 million COVID-19 tests have been conducted here in the Commonwealth. Almost 2 million individuals have been tested, and the state's rolling positive test rate, remains at about 0.8%. Just 302 cases remain hospitalized, with 63 cases currently in the ICU. Those are some of the smallest numbers we've seen since the spring. Over the past 6 months, the Commonwealth has worked hard to reduce the spread of COVID-19 and gradually reopen our economy. And since August, we've been pursuing a new and more strategic initiative to track COVID-19 cases by population in our 351 cities and towns. That strategy has helped state and local officials and healthcare folks identify hotspots and higher rates of infection that may need more resources and amplified communication for residents and businesses. Through our community enforcement and intervention teams, we're launching public awareness campaigns and supporting local law enforcement. The state's also partnering with local officials to provide technical and financial assistance in the hardest hit areas. And our administration is providing free testing resources as well as contact tracing and other public health resources in those high-risk communities as well. Our goal is to keep driving down our numbers on COVID as we head into the cooler months. This will allow us to continue to reopen our economy, and it's critical to maintaining some degree of confidence as we reopen our schools. It's critical that everyone continue to do their part when it comes to containing COVID. Face coverings, social distancing, and especially staying home if you feel sick. It's how we get people all the way back to work and back to school. There are many tools available to fight this virus, but one of the most effective and most important is vigilance and repetition on behalf of all of our citizens. Without a treatment or a vaccine, we all know that COVID-19 will continue to be with us. Now, with respect to what brings us to Fitchburg to celebrate Climate Week, tomorrow marks the 4th anniversary of the signing of Executive Order 569, which laid out a comprehensive approach to reducing greenhouse gas emissions here in Massachusetts. We followed that order with action, including nation-leading procurements of clean energy and investing over $800 million to address climate change, and working both with municipalities to make the Commonwealth more prepared for climate change and more resilient. Earlier this year, we committed the Commonwealth to achieving net zero emissions by 2050. And here in Massachusetts, we're advancing this work to proactively prepare for future natural and public health emergencies. And that's why we're here in Fitchburg to celebrate this grant for a portion of the John Fitch Highway. These funds will go toward an analysis of a roadway design focusing on drainage areas and runoff from land parcels, and it will bring the city closer to its vision of a resilient, green, and safe commercial corridor here. It will also help Fitchburg address ongoing flooding issues. The city will also pursue a strategy to reduce the risk of flooding while adding more space for walking and biking for residents. The city's been awarded $272,000 to move this important project forward. The one of 66 other Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness, or MVP, communities receiving over $11 million to plan for and implement climate change resilience projects. That brings our administration's total investment in the MVP program to over $44 million. It's the largest investment in climate change resiliency in state history. We're also pleased to welcome 26 new communities into the MVP program, bringing total municipal participation in the program to 89%. These projects are a boost for our environment and for our local economies, and every plan will create good jobs and protect businesses from climate impacts. And by the way, when we first started talking about creating a municipal vulnerability preparedness program, it wasn't a mandate. No community in Massachusetts had to participate in this program if they didn't want to or didn't choose to. And that was actually Secretary Theo Haridi's first assignment when she joined our administration to work on climate issues and on that original executive order, which was to deliver a program and to engage communities in a discussion about why this was important and how we could work with them to help them deal with the issues associated with resiliency. And the fact that we now have 90% of the communities in Massachusetts on a voluntary basis engaged with us on this and have put $44 million to work in those communities to help them deal with resiliency issues is a big statement, not just about the work that's done every day in communities across the Commonwealth, but also the leadership and enthusiasm that the Secretary brought to this in her previous role. I do want to spend a minute here talking about legislation. At the beginning of 2020, we laid out an ambitious goal to expand the MVP program to all 351 Massachusetts communities. We proposed dedicating a small amount of money from the deeds excise tax that could then be used to invest in projects, public and private, across our Commonwealth. S10, called an act providing climate change adaptation infrastructure investments in the Commonwealth, was designed, if passed by the legislature, to be used for projects that support infrastructure, enhance natural resources, and protect public and private property. And it would make it possible for us to spend almost $1 billion over 10 years on these types of initiatives. The reason we filed that legislation, which in some respects was the first of its kind in the country, was frankly we saw the writing on the wall in our conversations with our colleagues in local government, in our conversations with folks in the climate and atmospheric community. It was crystal clear to us that it was important for states to step up and help cities and towns make the investments they needed to make to create more resilient communities from one end of Massachusetts to the other. We continue to believe that this is a critical part of not just our environmental future, but our economic future here in Massachusetts, and I hope at some point between now and the end of the session, this legislation becomes law. With that, I'll turn it over to the Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you, Governor. Before I share my remarks about this program and the impact it will have here in Fitchburg, I also wanted to express my sympathy and deep sadness over the sudden and shocking passing of Chief Justice Ralph Gantz. Yesterday afternoon, when news began to spread, I had a few minutes to share sentiments with my colleagues on the Governor's Council, and words like dedicated, man of integrity, man who came up through the ranks of the trial court, someone who's deeply passionate about his causes, and was certainly someone who was very hands-on in his work as the Chief Justice and as an administrator. We witnessed that with criminal justice reform, how actively engaged he was throughout that process, and clearly in this reopening process for the trial court. He led a lot of those discussions and was very actively involved, and added stress to the already challenging work that he conducted as Chief Justice of our Supreme Judicial Court. It's a very sad day, not only for his family and his friends, but his colleagues in the trial court and for us here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Please add their family to your prayers. Thank you. I feel a little nostalgic coming to this field, given that it was several decades ago that I used to play here as a field hockey player, and it's great to be back. I am joined here with Senator Tran, and I see Mayor Mazzarella here as well, and I'm really happy to see Mayor Di Natale in person. It's really good to be at an event like this, where we can celebrate the importance of programs like this and the impact that they will have in community. It also gives us a chance to say thank you once again to all of the municipal workers across the Commonwealth. I see the DPW team here, and many of your counterparts who have done a great job, not only in these past 6 months, but really helping our communities plan and prepare and move forward in many ways. So just thank you all. This is a great program, as you've heard a little bit more about, and one that was voluntary. But even as a voluntary program, many communities have taken advantage of it, and we're very pleased to welcome new communities to the cohort today. Fitchburg is receiving a grant, as the governor said, over $270,000. But this is an important grant. It might seem like relatively small dollars, but it's really important grant for the city of Fitchburg to get to an area within the community that they might not have enough resource locally to get to. This is an important commercial corridor, but it is in a floodplain. And the unpredictable nature of flooding is a challenge for businesses looking to invest in their properties, to enhance the quality of their buildings or their physical attributes. And it also is a challenge for municipalities as they look to take on properties and turn them into productive properties that could then yield more tax revenue to a municipality. So the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program not only addresses climate and environmental issues, but also is an economic benefit to this program as well. So Fitchburg is using this as an opportunity to develop an implementation strategy to transform this area into what we would like to call a resilient roadway with improved walkability, bikeability, reduced urban heat, island effect, and reduced flooding vulnerability through green infrastructure solutions. So taking all the modern amenities around these kinds of solutions and then marrying them to your vision here locally will make for a resilient roadway and more economic opportunity and quality of life for the residents, perhaps even students in this area. Using the best available climate data projections, the team will assess long-term flood mitigation strategies and update the city's drainage model. This project will benefit the public health and safety of residents and local businesses and increase the vitality of natural ecosystems. It's a great example of how our administration has worked in partnership with communities to come up with solutions that make sense for all of us. And while our administration has taken a multifaceted approach to addressing climate change, We are particularly proud of this program and the national recognition it has gained. As I stated, many municipalities have taken advantage of a voluntary program. We've now reached an 89% participation rate, which is equivalent to 312 communities out of 351. That's a huge uptake rate in a relatively short period of time. This level of participation demonstrates that it's a program that works. And as the governor often says, when you find something that's working, keep doing more of it, and we clearly will. Thank you in Fitchburg for organizing your thoughts, taking advantage of the program, putting your ideas on paper, applying to what is a very competitive process, and rising to the top. It's an honor and a pleasure to partner with you on this critical issue, and we look forward to the outcome of this grant and the work that you're doing in this neighborhood of your city. It is now my pleasure to recognize Secretary Theoharides to come forward and talk more about the program.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. And the Lieutenant Governor and the Governor have been such tremendous supporters and advocates for this program, helping us really get the word out to all of our cities and towns about the opportunity. This year, as we were processing applications at the same time as moving through the challenges with COVID-19, I think we all did pause for a moment and just wonder what we'd see from communities coming into the program at a time when so many of you working on the front lines of this challenge at the municipal level were grappling with so many other things that needed your time and attention. And what we saw was record turnout, the most competitive round we've had, and a really strong interest in continuing this work of resiliency. And I think that is just to be commended to all of the municipalities who participated in this program, to the legislators who have supported the communities in chasing these grants and in supporting the funding for these grants. Thank you for your continued interest and your continued pursuit of building the community you want to see in the future. You know, certainly we're doing a big push. This is our Climate Week. We do it every year right around this time. And often around this time, we're seeing things like the California wildfires, the California, Oregon, Washington, the Western wildfires at this point. We're seeing things like this August moving through half of the alphabet of named storms by mid-August, which is a record. And so we certainly are very cognizant of all the climate change challenges we're seeing across the country. But this program is not only really designed to address those challenges and prepare for those challenges, but also to bring the community together to vision about what they want to see in the future. And resiliency for me it's not just bouncing back, it's sort of jumping up. I think we're all thinking a lot about resiliency these days with the pandemic in mind. And this is something that we think brings communities together, makes them stronger, and also really supports economies while delivering on environmental goals. And so a real opportunity and just a real privilege to be able to work with all of our communities across the state. I did want to particularly congratulate the mayor for this grant, and as well as the city of Leominster. In Leominster, we're giving a grant that will fund the initial phases of work necessary to design and implement a solution to stabilize a section of bank along the, I'm going to say this wrong, but the Manusinac Brook in the city's downtown. I did? Okay, all right, good. But really importantly, while this project and many of the projects we do, whether they're culverts or road studies or stabilizing a brook, they can seem fairly basic. They're infrastructure projects. They're making things work and making things safe and allowing you to be able to access parts of your city or town that may be threatened in the future. But the engagement in Leominster that's being conducted with an environmental justice community in their city to develop this solution is really significant and will keep part of the city accessible when erosion and runoff continue to get worse and continue to be a challenge. The brook has been defined now as a resilient downtown community anchor, and the project will serve as a linchpin to catalyze larger revitalization efforts in downtown Leominster. So something that ties environmental outcomes with economic gains for a community and for the future of the community. And also, I might add, really does a lot right now to keep folks in the environmental permitting, planning, construction, design and build fields working on terrific projects that continue efforts to build resiliency in communities. I did want to note on a larger scale a number of other programs we're working on at the state level in terms of climate change. The governor mentioned Executive Order 569. Since that time, we've done a statewide climate adaptation and mitigation plan with MEMA. We have launched the Resilient Massachusetts Action Team, and we've expanded our MVP program to enable local communities to plan and prepare, and recently committed to that significant goal of net zero emissions, which puts us up there with 4 other states and a handful of countries in the world who are committed to both tackling emission solutions and building resiliency. I'd finally like to just read the list of the 29 communities who are new to the program this year. These are not the communities who are getting the big dollars to do the action grants, but these are the communities who have stepped up and said, hey, we want in on this. We want to build resiliency in our communities. And so a big congratulations to Ashburnham, Ashby, Berkeley, Carlisle, Cheshire, Chester, Foxborough, Granville, Hamden, one of my hometowns, Hardwick, Heath, Holbrook, Hopedale, Layden, Mount Washington, New Braintree, Otis, Petersham, Richmond, Stockbridge, Upton, West Brookfield, West Hampton, Whitman, Wilbraham, and Wilmington. Congratulations, welcome to the program, and the next step is the big bucks. So work through those plans and we'll get you into the action grants. So thank you all for coming today. Thank you for your continued commitment to this program and for all of the ideas and energy you bring to this. Thank you to our climate MVP coordinators and program manager who are here for all your hard work to get these new communities in. And with that, I will turn it back to the governor. Thank you.
Questions on this for the mayor or for the secretary or me or lieutenant governor? Questions on other stuff? Well, I think, as you know, we were anticipating that Justice Link was going to retire at the end of October, and had just run a pretty comprehensive process, actually reopened it to collect candidates who might be interested in her seat. And honestly, given the short time frame between hearing the news about, I mean, it's not even 24 hours on Justice Gantz, we haven't thought much yet about next steps. There is a process, and obviously we need a few days to figure that out. You want to speak to that?
So the state and our Department of Environmental Protection are obviously committed to the safety at the Weymouth compressor station, and we have rules and procedures around safety protocols for compressor stations across the state. And so those protocols were followed. The notification process that needs to happen was followed, and for more details on the particular incident, you'd have to speak with the company. But in terms of the safety protocols that are in place for events of this nature, those were all followed, and the Department of Environmental Protection is also doing things like unannounced site visits, so very much committed to the ongoing safety of that facility. Additional review. I can't speak to that. The details of what happened with the company are something that we will absolutely look at, but the safety procedures that are in place for stations of this type were followed at the site.
Yeah, as you know, we began the investigation that ultimately led to referring about 40 different individuals to the U.S. Attorney's Office and to the Attorney General's Office for potential criminal review, and both pursued a number of those opportunities. I don't want to get lost on this incident specifically because there's a much bigger issue here, which is we filed legislation a very long time ago to dramatically alter the way the law associated with these kinds of incidents would be treated in Massachusetts for members of the Massachusetts State Police. Now, the Senate included that in their police reform bill. I don't think the House did. It's obviously part of the conference conversation. But I really want to see that bill, those changes in state law, find their way to my desk before the end of this session. And as far as I'm concerned, the sooner the better. And if they wanted to report it out separately, that'd be great, because that's the best way to deal with this. Well, keep in mind that I don't know the details on this one, and we probably need to get back to you on that. But fundamentally, I happen to think the biggest problem was state law, and I want to see those law changes take place because that will be the best way to ensure that justice is swift for people who steal, basically. We spent a lot of time working with the Broad Institute and with the Command Center and with the colleges and universities in Massachusetts to put together a very robust platform for testing and contact tracing in Massachusetts. And there are about 105 colleges, more than that in terms of campuses. And we are currently reviewing all of the protocols associated with testing and tracing and isolation and quarantining and notification, and plan to re-engage with the colleges generally on this. I will say that the testing element of this, which is pretty robust so far, has proven to be pretty effective, and with regular testing going on the vast majority of those campuses, we have a very low positive test rate. But it's really important that the contact tracing piece work the way it needs to work. And in this particular case, Boston College had campuses in 3 different communities. That's a lot of handoffs. And one of the things we talked to them about, which they agreed to do, and so did the 3 communities they operate in, was to make the contact tracing collaborative, which can handle multi-jurisdictional places more effectively. The overseer of the tracing program associated with the BC program. But the positive test rate overall on what at this point is way north of 100,000 tests across colleges in Massachusetts is very low. But clearly, we need to make sure we stay on top of this. Oh, okay. I think I said in my remarks earlier that there's a certain amount of vigilance and repetition that is required to make our efforts to deal with COVID-19 ultimately successful. And while they may seem annoying at times and pedantic, they're effective. And I think the Commonwealth of Mass, on a general basis, has done an extraordinarily good job. The people of Massachusetts have done an extraordinarily good job of staying vigilant and dealing with the repetition and the sort of the everyday issues associated with how you most effectively stop the spread, by doing the things that infectious control experts have told us will stop the spread. And that's been true for kids and adults. And I think one of the things each of these outbreaks tells us is that there are reasons why those protocols are in place. Because when they're not in place, stuff happens. And there are plenty of examples of how fast this thing can move. The probably most well-known one in this region is that wetting up in Maine, or the studies that have been done on how broadly the outbreak at the Biogen conference way back in March was, in terms of how many people were ultimately affected by that. But this has clearly been effective, and when people don't play by these rules and somebody has the virus, it spreads, and it spreads quickly. And that's been proven time and time again. But I have to remind people that in Massachusetts, it's been the vigilance and the discipline of the people of the Commonwealth that's made it possible for us to get to the point where we're the second lowest positive test rate in the country, and where over half the communities in Massachusetts haven't had more than 5 COVID cases per 100,000 now for over a month. And where, when you talk to people in the hospital world, in the healthcare world, they talk about the fact that they are seeing far less of the traditional sort of respiratory issues, sore throats, strep throats, earaches, all that stuff, than they normally see, because people have been wearing masks and socially distancing. So I think what the message from the outbreaks to me is there's a reason why we have these protocols in place, and there's a reason why we've been, as a Commonwealth, successful for the most part in dramatically reducing the spread of the virus, because people have stepped up and done the right thing every day, day after day. But each time there's one of these outbreaks, it inevitably involves, as I've said here before, people being familiar with people they're familiar with and sort of letting their guard down. And the big message for me is this stuff works, and we should stay on it.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for coming out, and congratulations again to you, Mayor.